The following is a preview of a Patreon exclusive. Where did that relationship start? How did it grow? How did it develop? So I think there's some elements of it that even if you don't like everything you get, there's some things that are really important, and it's really difficult to figure out where that line is because it probably, it depends on the viewer, us, in a lot of different ways, but I think it also depends on the character and where we come in. So a character like, let's take Ahsoka, because this is one I'm not really sure how I feel about. When we're introduced to Ahsoka, she's basically a child. She's a youngling, right? She's not quite a Padawan, or she's becoming a Padawan. And now for us to go back to when she was a true child, not a youngling, but a child, a non-Jedi.
I think.
Yeah,
If I
infant.
remember
Yeah,
correctly,
yeah.
in one of the stories, yeah.
I believe that's right. And so, it's like, okay, do I really want to know that? And sometimes we don't know until we see the story, and then we've also got to kind of take our, we have to gauge our objectivity a little bit about whether it's good or not, right? Which unfortunately what Solo kind of suffered from a bit.
Yeah.
But it's really tough to tell. I mean, some characters, Obi-Wan's a great example, right? So when we're introduced to Obi-Wan, he's so, he's towards the end of his life. We don't really get to know him very well. And so for us to go back in time with the prequel trilogy and to also have these other moments in between makes a lot of sense, right? Because he's lived a long life. He's had a lot of great adventures, a lot of great relationships. We know he had a very key relationship with Anakin. And so there's a lot of things in between that we can still extract from all of that are important and don't feel like overkill. On the other hand, though, it's really difficult to say, okay, well, at what point are you just tired of it? And you just feel like you're going to the well too many times. And I think some of it is just how often we go back and how quickly we go back to those wells. So when we're given a time to rest and kind of take a break from it, it doesn't seem as much. I mean, we've still not gone back we've done this with Dooku. We got a little bit of backstory on Dooku, but we really don't have as much on Qui-Gon. So
Right.
Are there other characters who might be interesting to explore too? And the answer might be yes for Albert Padilla and Chris Jones, but maybe not for the other millions of people who are consuming content for Star Wars that might not pick that up because they're like, well, Qui-Gon was cool, but he's not an Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
So there's a business side of it too, but I don't really know where the line is. I mean, because until you get the content, you don't really know. I mean, some people are like, okay, well, Book of Boba Fett was really more of a sequel. But again, we did get a little bit of an origin of what happened in between, right? And we liked that part, but we didn't necessarily, the sequel part didn't really engage us as much, right?
Yeah.
So you can see where some things work better than others.
Yeah, and for Boba, it was like we said. I mean, he had different phases of his life where he was, in the prequel trilogy. Yes, he was part of the story and certainly made sense because he was, the one clone that was not, genetically bred and all that.
Right.
But that was him as a kid once again, and then we have him as kind of like this fledgling young teenager when we get to the Clone Wars, and so that's kind of, and he's trying to figure out who he is, and he's kind of, rubbing elbows with the bounty hunters, the bounty hunters there, and he's got his little gang and that sort of thing.
Right.
And then we have this kind of, there's probably another level in there where he starts doing, well, is later in his life where he's running jobs and becomes a notorious bounty hunter that he is, working primarily for Jabba, being Jabba's right hand man, always around him. And then he has a literal rebirth of sorts, right? I mean, he's literally reborn, is as we saw in the Book of Boba Fett, and now he's on a completely different trajectory with his character. So I get for somebody like that, again, it depends, like you said, it depends on how they go about doing it. You brought up one thing, and I just want to come back to it because I want to kind of weigh in on it. There is a more nuanced origin as well. I guess there's a more nuanced aspect of origins that I do think that people have valid arguments for, and specifically, like you mentioned with Han Solo. We saw this with Indiana Jones, and when we got to Last Crusade, right, we got the origin of why he doesn't like snakes and why he had the scar and the use of the whip and his look, right? That look that he has with the fedora and the jacket and the whip, the bullwhip, all that was inspired by another character that we saw in there, right? And so And that seemed like I remember when that movie came out, I don't remember people being, like, disgruntled about it. Like, I thought everybody I mean, it might be because the movie's pretty darn good, and people argue now between whether that's the best movie or Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Whether it's best or not, it's usually one of people's favorites at the very least.
Absolutely. So that probably helps, whereas something like Solo, which I know isn't everyone's cup of tea, they kinda are doing the same thing there, right? They're giving us the whole, here's, we see the dice, right?
Yeah.
I'm holding up right now. We got to
Well, and
see.
and Beckett was a great example. It was a great comparison with Indiana Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, right, same kinda thing where he was kinda looking up, that was kind of his mentor and who he was trying to aspire to be at some point. We've got, like you said, the origin story with Chewbacca, the name, which I think was controversial for some folks,
Right.
and we'll get to that because I think that was when we start getting into kinda like the sacred cows of Star Wars. I think that one was one of them, maybe not on paper as much as Yoda, but I remember when Solo came out, there were people like, "Why do we need to know this?" Right? "Why is this important?" And
Well,
I
heck,
thought the way they
we
did
even
it
got
was,
kind of an origin story for the Millennium Falcon of sorts, right?
well, yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point. So, I mean, all of these, so I guess there is the question of, like, how much is too much when we go and tell, even at these different stages in the character's lives, but then there's a more nuanced, how much within the well itself do we get, and do we need to know all of those things? And I guess my stance, as simple as it is, I just really feel like it depends. I think if it's adding to the story, awesome. If it's not adding to the story, I still don't have a problem with it as long as it doesn't feel so overt or in your face, or like it's just a way to, I don't know. I wouldn't say fill a story or fill 2 hours of a movie, or pages within a comic book or pages within a book. But I don't mind that stuff. I actually do enjoy those things. I mean, that's what Wikipedia is for, right? How many times do we go down a rabbit hole and we spend so much time looking and we realize all these things about this character that we never knew about, but really have no kind of bearing on the character itself. They're just, flavor for that character.
Right. I mean, a character like Thrawn is a great example of that too.
Oh yeah,
A
yeah.
character that people just begged to get more on. And we finally got it, basically when he was canonized, we've got a lot of it ever since then. And it's just been, I don't know anybody that complained about what we've got with Thrawn. Thrawn, we've had, not only did he appear in later content, but he's had several books written about it from various parts of his life. And now we had the Thrawn comic book as well,
Hmm.
and so you could see where it's really done well. But so just to kind of go back, is there a, is there a clear line for you where you check out, or is it really case by case basis for you? Or is there something that really like, that turns me off? I don't know
No.
that I like that part.
For me, honestly, personally, like I said, I do consider myself to be a completionist in
Yes,
a
you
lot of
are.
things. Well, I mean, whether it's like comic books or things that I'm collecting. I mean, we play Marvel Puzzle Quest, and I'm like dropping money left and right just to complete a particular character when I don't need to, and it's just I
Right.
have this like innate
Compulsion.
compulsion to finish things. Like I want to know the whole thing, and so
This explains our book reviews, by the way, everyone.
yeah, or go listen to the Basement Podcast. I mean, the
Mm,
whole that whole kind of approach is what that show was predicated upon, and that's really getting into the weeds and knowing every last detail that of a particular thing, like cereal or something, you know.
right.
So yeah, for me, it doesn't bother me, but I know I'm like the 0.01% of Star Wars fandom, right? There's the 1% that is like the diehard Star Wars fans, and then there's like the 0.01% that feels like I need to know every single last detail, and we just spend our casual leisure time on Wikipedia looking things up and knowing that, Jawas have really bad sexual habits and they
They're
smell
very
and all.
furry.
And well, that came as a result of Mando, but you get my point, right? I mean, for me, to answer your question, sorry, no, there's really no limits. Now, I may not like everything, and I may choose to just like, man, that doesn't really resonate with me in any way. But I think pretty much everything's fair game, and I enjoy knowing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the part for me that really, I think that turns me off is when it's the throwaway stories in between. And man, this is so subjective though, because
Sure.
so if you take from a certain point of view, like the anthology of those stories, right?
Mm,
Some of them are really fun, fantastic, completely agnostic of really whatever's going on. You could kind of tell that story in a variety of timelines or whatnot.
Right.
But then there are some that just feel really forced, that we're trying to do a little too much to it. But again, that's just so subjective as to what works for you.
Mhm.
And I think this is a bit of a frustration point with me sometimes too, because I'm very much like you. You know, it's like, if you like it, fantastic. If you don't have to completely obliterate it online, type of thing, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, you can be passionate about it. That's fine. I don't care. You could say, I hate it. It just did not work for me. I think it breaks a lot of things. I don't like it. But when you start to go a little overboard, it's a little too much, right?
Yeah.
But I'm with you. It's very subjective, and that line moves a lot for me. It really just depends on what's going on.
Well, I think your kind of, baseline your baseline attraction to a character or interest in a character
Oh yeah.
kind of predetermines a lot of that, right? I mean, there are like, I could if they gave me every last detail about Maz Kanata, I could care less.
Oh my gosh.
I would not read it. I
I
don't
just want
wanna
to
know.
know how many times her and Hondo have hooked up.
Exactly, or how many times has she made, sexual advancements towards Chewbacca, and how far did she go? Does she have wandering hands? I'm sure all of that is described or
You
will be
sound
discussed at some
you
point.
sound pretty curious. You sound like you've written a few of these things down.
No, no, they are out there. I will tell you that I've stumbled across these fanfics, but yeah, like for that character, I could care less. She doesn't interest me, right?
Well, and
But
it's a good example. Like we've had these Amidala books that are man, they really resonate with a lot of people. I
mhm,
have not been able to get into them. They just
mm,
they don't resonate for me. They're well written. E.K. Johnson does a great job,
yep,
but they're just not. They just don't resonate with me, and so they just don't do it for me. But
yeah, and I
again,
would agree too.
that's
Like,
fine.
no, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're fine.
I was gonna say, yeah, the same thing. Like those books are well written. There are certain aspects, like I like the process by which they go about protecting Amidala and all of the way their costumes are designed and all I'm going to call it the spy espionage or secret service kind of stuff, right? That goes
Right.
into it. That's super intriguing. But once we get off of that and we get into the main story, I don't know. It just I'm with you. I'm kind of disconnected, and part of that is why we haven't really kind of talked about them. There's plenty of other things to talk about, but for some folks, like I know, let's talk about Becca. Becca loves those books, and she talks
Right.
about them all the time. And those are, she quotes passages on the fly from those books.
It's incredible what
So
she could quote.
yeah, no, and so for I get so that it kind of all goes back to that point, right? That is a character, like as much as I love Amidala, I'm not trying to read everything about what was going on in that particular past because she's not a character that I'm that interested in. I love her character from the movies, but beyond that, it's not a character that resonates as much with me.
I've actually found Sabe to be a bit more interesting in a lot of ways, and maybe because we associate Padme with Anakin, and it's more of this pairing of them, and it's a little bit
Yeah.
different there. But
Hmm.
and I know we're kind of off topic and stuff, but
Well, yeah.
I mean this is why people don't always enjoy comic books in particular. I think because they do get off on these tangents of sorts, where they get into these weeds that man, it feels like man, have we lost sight of the main story arc? And where a lot of people are like, I need to know how this fits in with the main story arc.
Big's
And if you
importance.
yeah, in comics and books and things like that, those types of mediums can really lead you on a variety of paths that feel like you've strayed way past, the movies, if you will, or that main narrative, and you feel like you've kind of lost touch with it. So I get that, but back to origin stories though.
Back to origins. All right, let's talk about some of these. And I don't know how you want to rate these, but we can give a thumbs up, thumbs down, or just you can give some general thoughts on it. But I know we've already talked about the Han Solo, but anything else as far as like any final thoughts on Han Solo? Because we well, y-
We're still getting new things about
yeah, I was
Han.
gonna say yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we know that there's a kind of an in between period of also before the sequel trilogy about what happened with him and Leia too, right?
Hmm.
So there's still more to explore, I think. But yeah, the comics have introduced Han's dad
Yep.
and his father to things, and I think that has introduced an interesting situation to it all. I've not finished the series quite, or I haven't caught up to the current issue. I think I'm only about one behind, and it's starting to get a little, it's starting to fade a little bit. But we'll see how that ends up. But I think overall, like I loved Solo. I thought Solo was just a lot of fun. Was it a critical have to have all this? No, but it was definitely a thumbs up for me. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie and a little heavy handed at times, sure, but overall, really, really fun. Just fun.
Yeah, I'm with you too. Like I enjoy that quite a bit, and I think there's still more to tell with. I mean, if Kazdan has his way, he was just recently on Twitter being mentioned again because he's been hush hushly talking about possibly a Solo 2 and all that. So who knows? But I think, he a lot of that is being was originally driven by him, right? I mean, he kind of
Right.
wrote that character. He kind of gave us the depth of that character that we got. Because if you think about it, Han Solo,
And with John Kasdan as well. Yeah. Someone that
yeah,
a character
well, his
he
son,
grew
right?
up with. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they did so much for that character when we got to Empire Strikes Back. He was already a good character when we in Star Wars. We got a whole nother level of complexity and dimension to him when we got to Empire Strikes Back, and from that point, that was kind of Kazdan's baby. Even though Lucas created him, a lot of what we know and love about Han Solo came from Larry Kazdan. So
Right.
but yeah, I would agree. Like Rogue One is a really fun film. I get if you're looking at it through a critique's eye lens, maybe not. I mean, it's certainly got its weaker points. It can
Solo
slow
or
down
Rogue
at times.
Solo, right?
Solo. Sorry,
Okay.
I misspoke there. I'm talking about Solo. So yeah, I get all that. But I think there's still more story to be told there. So I think they're doing good in my opinion with Han Solo's story, and I think there's still more to come.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, so what about Rogue One? Rogue One was kind of the origin of the rebellion, or this pivotal moment of the rebellion. Introduced some characters. How did we get the Death Star plan? So
Hmm.
it was a bit of an origin story.
Yep.
This is probably a predetermined answer, but was that something that you were really excited and felt needed to be told? And then how well did they do it?
No, I'm glad you threw this in here because this one completely eluded me when I was trying to think of examples. But this is probably one of the best examples of an origin story that I think a lot of people, if they were being really honest with themselves, and some people were very outspoken and vocal about it when it first came out, particularly because it was Disney and they were still bitter about the sell and all that, right?
Right.
But even if you were coming in with an objective perspective, the idea of like, why do we need to know the story of how those Death Star plans? I mean, it's intriguing, it's kind of interesting. But I personally, even as much as I've already declared that I am a completionist and I do want to know everything, I was just kind of like, you know what, this does not feel like it's going to be a story that I have to know. I don't feel like it's going to be, it's going to redefine or help, uh, you know, uh, recontextualize either, episode 4 or anything before that. And then completely changed my perspective when I went into that theater. I mean, I was completely blown away like everybody else. And it's why it continued to do so well because word of mouth started to spread that no, you really need to check this out. It's actually a really good movie.
Right.
And I think it continues to get better. I mean, there are people still talking about this movie. I mean, we got the Andor series, of course,
Right.
but there are still people out there now advocating that this is the best that Disney has released since, they came into the fold. So, and a lot of accounts, I would agree. It's a pretty solid story, but it's a great example of an origin story that I don't know that many people wanted. And we won't even touch on the production, nightmares that happened, right? It was just a
Right.
miracle that this dang movie even came out.
Right. Much less that was
But you
any good.
that it was any good, right? And we get the quality of the movie that we got. So yeah, it's a great origin story, and I can't believe that I mean, I believe it now because I've seen the movie, but I would not have thought that I'd be saying that, what was it, 4 years ago or whenever that movie came out now.
Right. And I think one of the key points of why Rogue One really resonated with people is that it wasn't this goody two shoes rebellion.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of doubt. There was uncertainty. There was dissension in the ranks. There was subterfuge. There was a spy network. There were dastardly dirty deeds going on behind the scenes. They had their hands dirty.
Right.
It wasn't so clean and proper like we saw in the sequel trilogy. And or in the original trilogy rather, I'm
Original
sorry.
yeah, good
What
versus
came
bad.
after. Yeah, what came after. Yeah, it wasn't, we thought they were also wholesome in that one, right? They were fighting for good, fighting against evil, the way
Mhm.
that George Lucas kind of envisioned it. But things are never so clear and simple, and that's real life. And I think that's one of the things that was really important for us to be able to see is that the origins of the rebellion, or at least this pivotal moment in the rebellion, wasn't so clean and clear and proper. Even with characters that we're going to go back and explore, like Mon Mothma and Andor, there are something else to them that drives some of that. And we know Saw Gerrera is another great example of how they change their position over time. And I think those are the stories that are interesting to help you understand the different stages of things as they develop. And when you come into the story later on, like we did with the original trilogy, you have so many opportunities to go back and explore how we got to that point. And that can be really, really fun and really interesting if we do it right. And we
Mhm.
add that complexity to it. And we really add that modern realism for today's day and age of storytelling. And again, that deviates from George Lucas. And I understand that
Yeah.
entirely. He wanted to have a very black and white kind of storytelling methodology to it to an extent, but that's not real life, right? And this is what makes these things interesting. This is where you can go back and say, okay, well, it wasn't always like that. We had to make some really hard decisions, and here's how we made them, and how what they were. What do you think?
Yeah.
And just kind of leave it up to you to decide whether or not it was right or wrong or good or bad.
So we've talked about these next ones already. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add around, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Leia, or even but somebody like Boba Fett or Thrawn. Anything that
Hey
is not
everyone,
clear.
it's Jonesy. We hope you've enjoyed this preview of the Patreon episode. If you'd like to listen to the episode in full, we invite you to head over to cantinacast.com/Patreon. Access to this episode begins at the $2 After Dark tier. If you're interested in joining a future Patreon episode, we encourage you to check out our Now Part of the Tribe and Delusions of Grandeur tiers. You can find all the details at cantinacast.com/Patreon. On behalf of Albert and myself, thank you all for your continued support, and may the Force be with you.